Mel Gibson has always been a controversial figure. On one hand, there's all the dumb stuff he's said and done that basically torched his own career. On the other hand, you've got some cult classics like Braveheart and Tarantino straight up calling Apocalypto a masterpiece. Right now, Gibson is back in the cultural zeitgeist. He's gearing up to make that long-rumored sequel to The Passion of the Christ, and people are talking about him again. So let's take a look at the movies he actually recommends watching. Everything from underrated gems of the 70s to Nolan and Scott's Gladiator. This is one of Spielberg's most underappreciated films, easily. It's this epic coming-of-age war film based on J.G. Ballard's semi-autobiographical novel. Christian Bale, who was just a kid at the time, plays an English boy trying to survive under Japanese occupation in China during World War II. John Malkovich is in it too, playing this character with this perfect, laconic cynicism. Despite being critically acclaimed, the movie didn't really land the way Spielberg probably hoped. It got 6 Oscar nominations, but lost all of them to The Last Emperor. It made $66 million off a $25 million budget, which isn't terrible, but for Spielberg, it's one of his least celebrated films. And critics were mixed. Some even accused Spielberg of Asian erasure because there weren't enough prominent Chinese characters. Mel Gibson, though, loves this movie. He straight up calls it a masterpiece and says what really bothered him was that nobody seemed to notice. Spielberg's a master. So many great films. One of the best he made, people hardly recognized him for it. Empire of the Sun. Phenomenal movie. Everyone knows Don Siegel for Dirty Harry, but the guy had other great films that just don't get talked about enough. Mel Gibson straight up called Charley Varrick the best film and said, "You've got to fucking see that. It's a great fucking movie. You can watch that again and again and again." This is a heist crime drama with a simple but killer setup. Walter Matthau plays a small-time crook who robs a bank with his wife and partner, only to realize they just stole from the mob. Not a great situation. The film is one of the most underrated crime movies of the 70s. It kind of got overshadowed because it was Siegel's first movie after Dirty Harry, but it deserves way more attention. And if nothing else, it's worth watching just for the final car chase. Matthau himself didn't like the movie, thought it was confusing. He even wrote a letter to Siegel saying, "I have seen it 3 times and am of slightly better than average intelligence, but I still don't quite understand what's going on." And apparently that actually hurt the film's box office because he just kept saying he didn't get it. This is one of those movies that, after you watch it, you're just not the same. John Boorman's Deliverance is a survival thriller about 4 businessmen from Atlanta who go canoeing in the Appalachian backwoods, and things go very bad. What starts as an adventure turns into a fight for survival, with nature and some truly terrifying locals closing in on them. This is the movie Burt Reynolds did instead of The Godfather. He was actually in the running to play Michael Corleone, but Brando wasn't having it. He literally said, "If Burt Reynolds is in my movie, I will quit." So Reynolds took Deliverance instead, and it ended up being his big breakthrough. Reynolds later said this was the best film he'd ever been in. And Gibson totally agrees. He called Deliverance perfect, said it was a fucking weird nightmare odyssey that explored primal fears in a way he didn't even think was possible. He even admitted that when making Apocalypto, he tried to tap into that same level of primal fear, but for him, Deliverance was just on another level. Before Spielberg was Spielberg, he made Duel, and Gibson still remembers the first time he saw it. He said, "It was amazing. It was really, really compelling." What really blew him away was hearing how Spielberg made the whole thing on practically no money. This was the movie that took Spielberg from being just a TV director to an actual filmmaker. It originally aired as an ABC Movie of the Week, but it got such a strong response that it was picked up for theatrical release. And the story is brilliantly simple. A businessman is driving down a highway when he suddenly gets hunted by this massive, faceless truck. No reason, no explanation, just relentless terror. Spielberg actually admitted that Duel was the blueprint for Jaws. When he pitched himself for the job, he straight up told the producers, "Watch Duel. It's Jaws on land." Mel Gibson talking about Roman Polanski. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. But look, Gibson's not afraid to praise movies from controversial directors, and Macbeth was a huge critical success when it came out. Even Roger Ebert was impressed. He called it one of the most pessimistic films ever made and a bloody masterpiece. And yeah, Polanski went for it with the violence. Crew members actually told him the film might be too gory, and his response was, "I know violence. You should have seen my house last summer." Polanski made this 2 years after his wife, Sharon Tate, was murdered by the Manson family, and you can feel that trauma in the film. The violence is graphic, way beyond what Shakespeare originally wrote. It also completely flopped at the box office, lost about $3.5 million. But Gibson loved it. Not despite all the violence, but maybe because of it. It was really enlightening, he said. "It's a bloodbath. A lot of heads rolling and shit. Freaking cool." You either love this movie, or you completely don't get it. There's no in-between. Memento is this psychological murder mystery drenched in existentialism, all about Guy Pearce's amnesiac character trying to piece together his wife's murder. And the way Nolan tells this story, cutting between black and white and color, shifting the timeline, it just pulls you into this totally disorienting headspace. Tarantino has talked about how much he loves this movie for years, and Mel Gibson's a fan too. He said it's a pretty complex thing to get a handle on. "I think Nolan's really talented." And Tarantino actually explained why this movie works the way it does. He said with movies like The Sixth Sense or Fight Club, you go back and re-watch them to look for holes. But with Memento, Nolan wants you to poke holes in it. It's part of the game. If you find one, that's almost as much fun as not finding one. So, if you've somehow never seen Memento, you need to. It's one of the most unique films of the 2000s, and it's still one of Nolan's best. Mel Gibson's a huge fan of Ridley Scott's filmmaking. He actually brought up Gladiator on the Joe Rogan Experience, saying there's this one shot at the beginning, Russell Crowe running his hand over the wheat. And he said, "Why does that work? I don't know. You can't explain it, but it works." And then later, he said Scott's films are always eye candy. Every time he goes out there, it's a feast for the eyes. Gladiator was a massive hit, one of the highest grossing movies of the year, won a ton of awards, and turned Russell Crowe into a full-on movie star. But not everyone loved it. Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars. He thought the visuals looked muddy, fuzzy, and indistinct, called the special effects shabby, and even said, "Gladiator lacks joy." And yeah, that did not stop the movie from being a juggernaut. Crowe still walked away with the Oscar for Best Actor. This movie redefined on-screen violence. Sam Peckinpah wanted to strip away the facade of movie violence and show it for what it was. He even said, "It's a terrible, ugly thing." And yet there's a certain response that you get from it, an excitement, because we're all violent people. And people were shocked. There were walkouts, nuns literally ran out of theaters, someone even wrote a protest letter to Congress. Mel Gibson loved The Wild Bunch so much he actually tried to remake it back in 2018. At first, even he thought it was a bad idea. He literally said, "Why make The Wild Bunch again? Who would do that?" But then he sat with it, found his way into the story, and got excited about it. He wanted to make a film about last chances and guys with lives of accrued violence. Warner Brothers has been trying to remake Peckinpah's film for years. Will Smith was once set to star in a remake. That remake never happened, and Gibson's too. And maybe that's for the best. Some films are better be left alone, and The Wild Bunch is definitely one of them. Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter isn't a war film the way Apocalypse Now or Platoon are. It's about what happens after. It's about how Vietnam destroyed lives long after the fighting stopped. 3 friends go to war, and when they come back, they're not the same. The film won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Cimino, and Best Supporting Actor for Walken. Mel Gibson called this a whole other thing, a whole other level, and it makes sense why he connected with it. He's been drawn to war movies his whole career. In 2002, he did We Were Soldiers, another Vietnam War film. But The Deer Hunter is different. It's not about combat, it's about consequences. When Barry Lyndon first hit theaters, people weren't exactly rushing to call it a masterpiece, but over the years, it's been completely reappraised, now considered right up there with Kubrick's best. This is Kubrick's take on the period drama, coming right after A Clockwork Orange. And like everything he did, he put his own unmistakable stamp on it. Scorsese has said he keeps coming back to Barry Lyndon, not because it's his favorite Kubrick, but because it's such a profoundly emotional experience. And Mel Gibson was completely mesmerized by it. He said he had to watch it 3 times just to take in the world Kubrick created. It was fascinating, he said. You had that kind of film with all the trappings of that period, and one expected some kind of, I don't know, 2-dimensional thing, but there was all this stuff going on outside of it that was really surprising. This is one of those movies people either love or absolutely hate. Roger Ebert trashed it, calling it an ideological mess, a paranoid right-wing fantasy masquerading as an Orwellian warning. It pretends to oppose the police state and forced mind control, but all it really does is celebrate the nastiness of its hero, Alex. Tarantino accused Kubrick of being a hypocrite, saying he only made the movie for the first 20 minutes of violence. But even Tarantino had to admit, that first 20 minutes is pretty fucking perfect. Mel Gibson was impressed. A Clockwork Orange is great. That was some bold filmmaking. For that time, it's still hard. You can't even watch it. How the hell did he get away with it? And that's the thing. It is still hard to watch. It's still disturbing. And that's exactly why it's never lost its impact. Orson Welles once said that if Howard Hawks was great prose, John Ford was poetry. And The Searchers, that's Ford at his most poetic. The film follows John Wayne as a Civil War veteran searching for his abducted niece. But it's more than just a rescue mission. It's a film about obsession, about prejudice. Ford wasn't the first to address the mistreatment of indigenous people in film, but it wasn't common at the time. And his cinematography here changed how Westerns were shot. Scorsese has said there's nothing quite like The Searchers, the VistaVision image, the way Ford composes his wide shots of Monument Valley, the way riders enter the frame from below in these low-angle compositions. And Gibson still remembers the camera angles, how Ford could just hold on a guy's face in a close-up and get everything out of it. It stuck with him. Well, it stuck with everyone, actually.